Yeah, this is a response to Conference Report's recent videos on vegetarianism. I agree, there are similarities with the atheists against theism and meat eaters against vegetarian arguments. There's also similarities between pro-life against pro-choice arguments. For instance, when I hear vegetarians make the argument that their vegan choice absolutely reduces suffering, and meat eaters are immoral or unethical for not agreeing, I honestly see that as the same as a pro-lifer stating with absolute certainty that life begins at conception, and if you disagree with them, you support a criminal behavior. The majority of pro-lifers do believe that abortion should be illegal. Now, I know not all vegans believe that meat should be banned. However, there are quite a few that do, and I think the ones that do are just as committed to that goal as pro-life groups are to banning abortion. Now, obviously, one can argue against theistic claims, and that doesn't make you an anti-theist. In the same manner, you can argue against claims of vegetarians, and that doesn't make you an anti-vegan. Now, there are people out there that are anti-theists. I'm one of them, because I believe just holding that position, even if you're not trying to force others to believe as you, is demonstrably harmful. However, I just don't see very many non-vegetarians that are anti-vegan in that same way. There's just no logical reason to have a problem with somebody choosing not to eat meat. It's only when the vegetarian tells you that you're causing unacceptable harm and must stop, that's when the non-vegetarian will get defensive of their choice to eat meat. Now, even though I'm an anti-theist, though, I wouldn't want to ban religion. I assume you would consider yourself an anti-carnivore, and you say you wouldn't want to ban meat. And that's great. As long as you don't try to start the war on carnivores, you can come across as strident as you wish. I agree with your first video in that some of the arguments you mentioned are very poor. I agree the naturalistic argument is bunk. What we did in the past has no bearing on what we do now. I also agree the nutritional argument is bunk. We know we can get everything we need from fruits, nuts, vegetables, grains. The latest research in evolutionary biology does suggest that we owe our fat brain evolution to shellfish, fish and shellfish, because apparently without omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, our brains begin to shrink. They don't know if it affects your intelligence, but brain shrinkage, that can't be good. And they found some correlation with humans in accelerated development near oceans. But since you can also get these compounds from nuts, unless you're allergic to nuts, the nutrition argument is still a poor excuse for not being a vegetarian. I think the superiority argument gets misrepresented. It's not about superiority or having superior intelligence. That's not what separates us from animals. It's what we do with that intelligence, the potential that intelligence gives us. We develop what is known as the teaching triangle. It allows us to pass down knowledge. We can pay it forward concepts. A single human life can have a profound effect on all future generations, and the only way that an animal can affect future generations is to make future generations. Humans form societies. We create social contracts with each other. For instance, and bear with me here, if I'm hiking in the woods and I come across a mountain lion mauling another hiker, I'm obligated to do something. I don't necessarily have to offer myself up as an alternative meal, but I have to at least find some help. And if I don't, it's a crime, and in extreme cases I can be guilty of negligent homicide. However, if I come across a mountain lion mauling a deer, that's nature, and it's absolutely none of my concern. He's not part of my society, and I have no ethical obligations to do anything. Now, how about if I come across a human mauling a deer? Well, if he's wearing clothes, he's committed the crime of animal abuse, and I must report it. Now, what if he's naked and looks like he was raised by wolves? Well, I should probably still report it, but if it turns out wolves did raise him, he hasn't committed a crime, as he's not part of civilization. And one of all this was that it's not the fact that we're smart humans that separates us from animals, it's what we do with those capabilities. So what do ethics have to say about bringing an animal into existence for the purpose of food? You mentioned we have laws governing the treatment of animals, and you're correct. The laws we have concerning the ethical treatment of animals, however, are only there to deal with unnecessary suffering. There are no laws against imposing suffering. We do this all the time. Imposing existence imposes suffering. In addition, these laws cannot and do not have anything to say about suffering as a whole, because suffering can only be affected individually. Suffering is a subjective experience, and these experiences cannot accumulate. More instances of suffering only means more instances of suffering, not more suffering. We try to assign levels of importance to these things, even if the assessments are arbitrary. For example, if there are a few people here suffering and a few thousand people over there suffering, it seems logical to call the thousands of instances of suffering more suffering, and the other only just a few instances of suffering. But that's an illusion, and you can prove that just by increasing the numbers. You make it 1 million here and 2 million over there, and the value assessments equalize. You would never say, even though there's a million few people suffering here, that that was less suffering. More proof that it's just arbitrary is how selective we are deciding when we think suffering accumulates. We have imposed existence on billions of pets that will suffer as much or more than most food animals. Food animals are not allowed to get old and decrepit. It's like Logan's Run for them, only they'll never find out. Is it that only suffering without love accumulates? The last dog I had was with me for 17 years, and about the last 4 years of her life she had developed hip problems and she couldn't get up on her own. So I had made a sling for her and would walk her out in the backyard and let her do her business. And occasionally, I wouldn't get there on time, and she'd go right where she was lying, and I'd have to wash her off. And at nighttime, I'd put diapers on her. But she never seemed like she was in pain. She was always happy to see me, wagging her tail. She loved to be scratched. She was still a good companion. So I kept her around, and finally she died and passed away in her sleep. And then you tell that to some people, and they think, well, that's a nice story. I put so much effort into keeping that dog, or giving that dog a long, happy life. And then she passed away peacefully in her sleep. But, is that really a nice story? Didn't I impose a lot of unnecessary suffering on her for just, selfish reasons? Was it anthropomorphic of me to think that she wouldn't want to leave me? Did her life have value, even if that value was just a companionship for me? Now, we constantly make these anthropomorphic value judgments, and just because humans are assigning a purpose for these animals, and just because you know something about their life or their fate that they could never comprehend, does not make their life sad to them. For domesticated animals, as long as they have plenty of food, accessible mates, they could care less what's on the other side of that fence. Freedom has no meaning for them, and they have no care or understanding for what method of death is going to come for them. As long as they're not mistreated, they're just as much value to their lives, to their time here, as wild animals or loved pets. The reality of life for food animals is the same for wild animals, but for some reason, as long as we allow wild animals to die from any of the methods that nature has in store for them other than human predation, the more the merrier. Now, this would be counterintuitive if suffering were in any way cumulative. We see any decline in wild animal populations as a problem that must be addressed, because the life of a wild animal is always worth living regardless of how much suffering we know it will endure. So why do the lives of captive animals have little to no value unless they're cared for like pets and allowed to live as long as their biology enables? You asked a hypothetical question at the end of your second video. If eating meat was proven to add 5 years of your life, would that make it okay? Well, to clarify, first, you wouldn't be just tacking on 5 years to the end of your life. You would be improving the quality of life up to that point to get that extra 5 years. But primarily, you just made the "we're all going to die anyways" argument. Really, if you can't assign value to 5 more years of human life, how can you do that for animal life? I can't think of anything an animal might do of value to other animals with 5 more years of life, but I can think of a lot of things a human might possibly do. I think that has nothing to say about what we do with a dead animal. And the only reason it has anything to say about, what we do with a dead human is because of the sensibilities of those that knew them while they were still alive. Do you really care what they do with your body after you're dead? And, unless you're cremated, you're going to be food for something. And I saw pictures of the other day of a Tibetan burial practice called a sky funeral, where they tie your body to a stake and let the buzzards eat you. And I guess buzzards crap you out all over the countryside. And, I don't have a problem with that. I think what constitutes the ethical treatment of my body should, within reason, be left up to me. You quoted, was it Jeremy Bentham as an argument for anesthetizing animals wouldn't change your ethical stance, more or less. And I see what you're saying, but I have no idea how that opens the floodgates to, Soylent Green factories. Obviously, it takes extreme circumstances to go there. His statement sounds like a good pro-life argument, though. It's not whether it is a human, it's whether it can be a human. And I guess if somehow all the plants and animals die, we might have to consider growing humans in vats and then somehow forgive ourselves for it, though I don't understand what there would be to forgive. I think the closer everyone can get to a vegan diet, the better. It's more efficient, it's better for the environment, it's healthier. I still eat some seafood, dairy, and eggs, and I think that's as close to vegan as I'll ever get. Now, I buy very little commercial seafood. Most all the fish I eat I catch myself. I grew up in South Florida, and fishing has always been a part of my life, and you can never convince me that catching a fish imposes suffering. The life of a fish has got to be horrifying. Everything is trying to eat them. I think they hit that numbing ice and think, oh, thank God it's over. Maybe I'm anthropomorphizing a little. I honestly don't think the ethical or suffering reduction argument will do any good. The people that it would work on it already has, and they're vegans, and it's just not objectively true that vegetarianism reduces suffering. Another bad argument is that meat eaters are just in denial over the suffering that goes on in the meat industry. I don't think they are at all. In fact, I think the picture they have in their head is far worse than reality. Vegans have been showing videos of these worst slaughterhouses they could find for a long time. And the truth is, these are no more representative of the American meat industry than pictures of late-term abortions are of the abortion practice. However, I'm all for improving conditions, including possible, even wireheading in the future, or designer drugs, and even genetically engineering animals with no higher brain functions at all. You may have guessed I consider myself an abolitionist. I see humans as the only life on this planet capable of realizing such a potential. However, I don't believe we can include non-human animals in that goal. Successfully ending suffering for animals would only serve to halt their evolution and rob them of their shot at this goal should we fail. If I didn't firmly believe that this goal was not only attainable but inevitable, I might be an extreme negative utilitarian. There would be no point to going like this. That's another subject. If you're still here, thanks for listening.